Greetings and welcome to episode 26 of the Sustaining the Herd podcast, brought to you by Agri-Services and Engineering of Raymond, Nebraska. Welcome back to our existing listeners or past listeners, and welcome to our new listeners. And so for our new listeners, we'd like to tell you a little bit about what Sustaining the Herd is all about. And basically, we like to talk about everything involving sustainability as it relates to animal agriculture and just agriculture in general. And well, what does sustainability mean to Agri-Services and Engineering? Well, it means protecting the air that we breathe and the water that we drink as it relates to agriculture. It means doing more with less. That is certainly a guidepost of sustainability. How can we do more with fewer resources? And then lastly, but certainly not least, and there's lots more parts of sustainability, but we want to have business sustainability. That's businesses that are strong and businesses that can endure, and so that American agriculture is alive and well, and not only feeding the United States, but feeding the world. And so joined in the studio by my co-host, Brock Vitek.
Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Brock. And our special guest this episode is Andy Fabin of Fabin Farms of Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
So this is kind of a fun story. And as most of you know, Brock and I we're 26 episodes in and to Sustaining the Herd. And so one day I'm riding the Aero bus in the Pittsburgh airport. And I'm wearing my Secchi vest, and a gentleman says to me, "Oh, you work for Secchi?" And I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I do." And I start having this conversation with this person that ends up being Andy Fabin, and learn that Andy Fabin is a row crop farmer, and they do lots of other cool stuff in Indiana, Pennsylvania, and so. And so it's been a pleasure getting to know Andy so far. Visited him at his operation, and while we were leaving the airport that day, Andy said something to me about you're one of the Sustaining the Herd guys or something like that. Andy, wasn't? I think you mentioned, and matter of fact, I am. And at that point, I put in the back of my mind that I think Andy would be a great guest in Sustaining the Herd. And we always talk about how Sustaining the Herd, because we're relatively new, it's every episode is a first. And so this is a huge first in that this is the first producer east of the Mississippi. And so we're super glad to have you, Andy.
Well, I'm glad to be on. I guess I'm not the first east of the Mississippi. A few episodes back, you had a guest from Pennsylvania just to the north of you.
You did. You're absolutely right. We had Katie Dodder, and and that is a very good distinction. And of course, our guests are smarter than at least one of the hosts. And although Katie operates her English as a second language business, but she is also she would call herself a dairy farmer. So you're absolutely right. So let's just say that, Andy, you are the first row crop farmer east of the Mississippi, and so again, we're super glad to have you. So,
well, I'm glad to be here. And back to our introduction that we had. I forget, it was late night coming back through Chicago, I believe. And I saw your coat as I was passing you on the plane. And I was like, man, that's odd for a Secchi employee to be headed to Pittsburgh. So I knew I had to catch up with you.
Yeah, I'm super glad you did. And I kind of spilled the beans a little bit about you and your operation, but how about just telling our guests what do you guys do?
Yeah, so I guess like every farmer, a little bit of everything. Here in Western Pennsylvania, agriculture is definitely not taking the leading charge on our economy, but we do play an important role, I guess. So my family, we've been farming here. My sister and I would be the third generation on the farm. My father and uncle just recently retired here, and my dad is close to 2 years ago, and my uncle retired about 5-6 years ago, something like that. So my sister and I, kind of run the place as a partnership now, and got a handful of employees that we work with every day. But yeah, we're fairly diversified when it comes to agriculture, not far from agriculture, but diversified within that bucket. So we grow corn, soybeans, a little bit of wheat that we mix into the rotation. But we also buy and sell corn and soybeans as well. So we basis trade those products, but also process soybeans. So we'll buy soybeans, crush them, and make soybean meal and soybean oil that goes out to, feed mills in the state here. So, mostly poultry, some dairy as well that use the meal in the ration, and the oil can go for literally thousands of different products, but most of ours goes into feed rations as well. So they're using the whole bean. They're just kind of mixing the ratio up a little bit.
Excellent.
Andy, how did you guys first get into soybean processing?
We've been doing the soybean processing, I think it was 2009 or 2010 when we really started the first crush. But it was probably a 15-year exploration of finding an outlet for our beans before that. We've grown beans in Western Pennsylvania for, decades, 30 plus years. And the closest markets to go to a crusher was either Western Ohio, which is 250 miles, or to the port of Baltimore, which is 200 miles. But Pennsylvania is also a deficit state when it comes to grain. So we haul our grain out to get processed, then we haul it back in to go into dairy rations, poultry rations, etc. So we were just kind of looking to cut a little bit of the freight, the logistics cost out of it.
That's great. Sounds like you saw an opportunity and a need in the market, and also had a need yourself maybe for having an end market for your product a little closer, and you went and you capitalized on that. That's great.
That was the goal and the mission. Never to the size of, like any of the ABCs out there. They'll do more in a day than we'll do in a month easily, but it keeps us busy as a small family operation.
Sure. It takes everyone involved in the market to make the world go around.
Yep, that's right.
And I'd like to, I know I asked about processing. I'd like to take a step back in the soybean production process, and corn too. And I'm curious, Andy, what are some novel or unique sustainability focused practices that you all might be using in your corn and soybean production?
Well, I've kind of appreciated your intro for quite some time, where sustainability is more than just one single point. Sustainability has thousands of different definitions. I think if you asked every farmer, not only in this country but elsewhere, they would have a different definition. But for me, it's environmental sustainability, business sustainability, family, community, etc. So there are tons of different angles that you have to look at it from.
Mm-hmm. It's the three-legged milking stool of sustainability.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Andy, what are some of the, you mentioned there's these three concepts of sustainability. What can you talk about, just playing off what Brock said, just some specific practices that you guys do in terms of your cropping operation that you would consider to really enhance sustainability?
For as long as I can remember, growing up here on the farm, we've been no-till. Here in Western Pennsylvania, we barely have a flat acre. So everything is on contours and slopes. It's a different approach to farming here in the East with our amount of rain that we get than somewhere like the Dakotas or the I-states, where you can plant from field ditch to field ditch, or road ditch to road ditch. We follow contours. We have grass waterways that run everywhere, diversion ditches to slow down the flow of water. And so conservation is really important to how we do business.
Yeah. When we met at your office, you were talking about some things just like what you do with sprayers, like just for, you're familiar how we like to address the people in town, and wow the people in town by how farmers are all stars when it comes to sustainability. But like, if you would talk about like spraying and the weed ID and things like that, because it's just mind blowing.
So, we kind of, I guess we'll say we drink the Kool-Aid when it comes to John Deere equipment. John Deere technology has kind of made everything like Apple has done with their iPhone. If you have the iPhone, you have the watch, you have the ear pods, etc. And John Deere has kind of done the same thing with their technology. Once you have one piece of their technology, it's easier to have the whole array. And we have upgraded our spray capacity to the new See and Spray is what John Deere calls it. So as we're traveling out through the field, whether it's corn or beans or even a fallow field, little cameras mounted on the spray boom itself are activated, and they're looking for weeds, and they're actively spraying weeds and not applying chemicals where we don't want to or need to. So we can save considerable amounts of chemical by only spraying weeds and not corn or beans.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty amazing technology to even watch as the operator in the seat. It's interesting to be traveling through the field and you've got the poppets kind of turning on and off as the computer tells it to. So it's really amazing technology.
Yeah, and so I think you probably have a pretty good handle then on what you save in terms of spray material. Like, in other words, this way as opposed to broadcast.
Well, we didn't get to use it for the full summer last year. We only got to use it for a small amount of time, but we were seeing considerable savings. I don't know that in our area we'll see the full savings that you would on like a quarter section or, larger fields in the Midwest. We farm several thousand acres, and I think our average field size is somewhere in like the high 30s acres. So, you see considerably more weeds in the field on the outside pass. So a larger percent of our field is that outside pass. But I think, as we learn the technology and learn how to use it better, we will start to see even greater savings.
It's funny, without even knowing it, you answered one of the questions that I get the most when I travel out west, and that is what are the field sizes like in Pennsylvania? And
very small.
And that is average, right? That's
yeah.
I know I've asked you that question before, Andrew.
Yeah.
It's crazy for my Nebraska brain to think about the average field size being 30 some acres.
Yeah. It's a different approach, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. As you're describing that spraying technology, Andy, I just going back to what we talked about a moment ago with these different aspects of sustainability. One, you're applying less chemical, putting less of that into the environment. And by using less chemical, you're just using less overall, needing to purchase less, so hopefully more profitable, and probably having to refill the sprayer less often as well, if I had to guess.
Yep.
So you're saving time, labor, it just hitting all those points of sustainability once again. So that's really neat.
Yeah, and we also do way more than that when it comes to technology. We grid sample every acre of the farms that we produce on. So when we send soil samples in and then we look at our yield maps from the previous year, we can overlay them and we can dial in specifically how much each acre needs of fertilizer. and put exactly what that acre needs, and not a pound more, not a pound less. So we can save tons of inputs that way as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's another huge point for our the people in town to understand, is that the fields that need the fertilizer are getting it. The fields that don't need the fertilizer aren't getting it, and so that contributes to your business sustainability. It contributes to the environmental sustainability because there's less of a chance of it running off. It's just everything is pointed. It all points in the right direction. Yeah, and so you've been at it long enough now where you've seen a trajectory when it comes to sustainability. In other words, I suspect your dad and your uncle probably moldboard plowed everything, and then you've gone to now no-till, and now you're using these sprayer technologies. What's your crystal ball look like, Andy? Where does it go from here?
Yeah. I have no idea where it goes. It seems like every day I'm reading a new article about automated equipment. In the livestock feeding industry, you see AI being deployed everywhere, from reading and managing bunk space to animal health. It's just everybody's got a different idea for AI and robotics, and the sky is kind of the limit right now. So, every John Deere, Case International, they've all got some sort of automated, whether it's a tractor, a combine, it's coming quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I met you in the airport, I believe you were traveling on soybean board business. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
And so part of as part of your continued introduction here or interview, just tell us about your experience with the soybean board, and what have you done for that organization, and what does that organization do?
Sure. I can no longer speak for the soybean board, because when I met you, I was actually coming home from my last meeting with them. So I have been retired from the board, if you will. But the United Soybean Board is the checkoff for soybean farmers in the United States. So they basically represent 600 some odd thousand soybean farmers in the U.S. and collect 1/2% of every bushel of soybeans to use for marketing and research purposes. So, I spent quite a few years working on that board, and I really respect the mission that the soy checkoff has, and I think they perform very well. I guess I'm biased, obviously, but I think it's a valuable mission.
Yeah, and so what exactly does the soybean board do? Like, tell us about what you did when you traveled for them, and etc.
So their mission is, like I said, to promote soybeans, whether it is research for production or going and marketing our beans around the world. So, if it falls in that bucket, we can do it. It's a checkoff, so that's it's pretty heavily regulated what we can and cannot spend money on. So we toe the line pretty tight.
Did you do any international travel as part of that, Andy? Go on any trade missions or anything?
Yeah, that is, in my opinion, maybe one of the most important things that the checkoff does is promote our product around the world. We produce a lot of soybeans here in the United States, and it's important to find markets where people want them. China was always the 800-pound gorilla. Not so much anymore, not because they don't have the appetite for them, but because of barriers, etc., that we've got. But it was maybe a good lesson for us the first time around. The first, I don't know what you want to call it, trade war that we experienced in 2018. I'm just guessing. I forget what year it was.
Yeah.
But it forced our hands to go out and look at different markets, find out where the beans were really needed. And we cultivated some really good relationships that I think we would be in a lot worse spot now if we didn't do that.
Yeah. So who are the biggest importers, and what would you consider to be some far-flung place? It's like, wow, I would never expect that country to buy beans.
Well, yeah, we basically send beans to every corner. To be honest, some of our best customers or partners are right here in the Americas, Mexico, Colombia, right here close by, so that we don't have to put a lot of freight into those customers, and they can get our product that they need for their, whether it's their animals or human consumption. But, another market that's really starting to pick up is MENA, which is Middle East and North Africa.
Mm.
As all these countries get richer, they have an appetite for protein, and pigs, chickens, cows, they all eat soybeans as their protein source. So it's an important product for them to have.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
Yeah. Southeast Asia is another really big customer. A lot of small customers, but even a country like Indonesia, they buy, I forget how many millions of metric tons of soybeans that does not go into animal feed. It goes into human consumption. So one of their national dishes in Indonesia is, the name of it's slipping my mind here right now, but it's a fermented soybean that they eat almost daily as a protein source. I'm trying to look the name up right now because it's slipping my mind.
It's interesting you mentioned Indonesia, Andy. So one of my, Andrew's heard this before, one of my very best friends works for the Nebraska Soybean Board, and he's been on several international trade missions and soybean promotion trips. He offices here out of Lincoln. And he went to Indonesia sometime last year, and I think he's headed again sometime here in 2025.
Yeah, they're a great partner.
He said that was a really good experience.
Yep. Yeah, they eat it every day. I think it's kind of like a breakfast staple kind of meal. Tempeh is the name of it. Okay. I apologize.
That's what I actually, so I couldn't remember the name either, but it's funny. So it was tempeh. My friend actually brought a couple bags back, and I got to try it when he went to Indonesia last year. So I can say I've eaten tempeh.
Yep. I've tried it as well.
It was like a kind of like a, not a Rice Krispie, but almost like a soybean crispy.
Oh, so you had the
chip
dried,
or something?
Yeah, you had the dried chip.
Yeah, I guess I had the dried version. Yep,
Okay.
It was a good snack.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound too bad, because I've heard of stinky tofu, but
not at all.
Okay. So
good deal.
So Andy, there's, I guess, doesn't take too much to figure out that there's lots of things going on in the world right now as it relates to ag trade or trade in general and whatnot. And we'll steer away from public or personal opinions and whatnot. But just curious, give us just your thoughts of the whole idea of trade deficits and the pros and the cons of doing that. And so not so much your opinion, but educate us, if you would, as far as from a producer's perspective, what does that really mean?
Yeah. So as a producer, and not really speaking on behalf of anybody other than myself, I would say free and open trade is good for the American farmer. We are, as a whole, really good at producing. We do so well that we bring our prices to pretty much a break even every year. It's very rare that we profit for more than a year or two at a time, because we get so good at it, once again, that we we oversupply the market, which means we need to have customers. You know, the United States, I think, is less than 5% of the global population. So that means there are a lot of mouths to feed that aren't in the United States. And I think we can really do a good job at, helping do that mission. Whether it's the grain or value added, we need to be able to efficiently produce chicken, pork, beef, milk, eggs, and get those to our customers.
Yeah, certainly.
And free trade agreements really help that, in my opinion. Meddling with the economy is typically not what's best for the American farmer.
Mm-hmm. As a follow-up to that, Andy, we all know that tariffs have been in the news lately, from both sides of the table. Yep. And I just like to ask, what role do you see tariffs playing in that trade arena? Both, maybe pros sometimes and cons at other times, tariffs as tools, perhaps.
That's tricky, because I just said I'm a proponent of free and open trade. The U.S. producers run into tariffs all around the world when we're trying to export our products, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not. Take, for instance, like some of the North African countries like Tunisia, for example. I believe they still have an import tariff on U.S. soybeans, or I'm sorry, U.S. soybean meal, but they do not tariff soybeans. It's mainly because their economy needs both soybean meal and soybean oil. So if they tariff the meal, that means that their processors can more effectively import the bean, crush it there, and they have both products. Whether I agree with that or not, it still works because we can import the bean. I think you just learn that with relationship building by going to these countries, meeting the buyers, meeting the people that need our products, learning, the little nuances and intricacies of each market and filling that hole. So, do I like them? No, but sometimes we can work around them.
Is there ever a time when they're justified? In other words, if someone is ever dumping a commodity on our in our markets, does it then? Are there any instances there where it makes sense? Tariffs, that is.
Yeah, probably so. I'm not going to sit here and throw a blanket statement out that they're good or bad either way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, countries, even our country, sometimes we need to protect our industry. If China wants to export something to the United States that we produce, maybe the government does have a little bit of a foothold to tariff that to protect the infrastructure that we've got built here. Mm-hmm. So, I do say there's probably a time and a place, but just tariffs on everything, that's tough for me. Like I said, we're only roughly 5% of the world's population, but we're, I think, 30% of the world's wealth as well. So we are probably, or not probably, we're going to buy a lot of stuff from other countries, mainly because we have the money to do it. Right. And, right. I like cheap stuff myself. I don't want to go to Walmart and buy a $40 pack of white undershirts. I'd rather go to Walmart and spend $5 on the same white T-shirt.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. No doubt about that. And so, just in your experience with global trade, are there any countries that for instance, won't take our soybeans for any particular reason, like our production practices, et cetera?
We have made some pretty big inroads in that. There was, there were a lot of countries for a long time that wouldn't buy U.S. grain products because they were GMO. A lot of that has opened up. Some of them, they'll go back and forth depending on, a political whim. But, we're sending grain to Europe, not as big of volumes as you would like to see, but we're doing it now. And there are other countries that are opening up all the time. India being a big one. They were always no GMOs ever, and in the last 2 years they've started taking soybeans and soybean meal. So they could potentially be a massive market if it kind of opens up even more so.
Right. Are there any countries that are up and comers as producers?
Producers of
soybeans.
Well, we've been overtaken by Brazil now, as the largest soybean producer and exporter. And I don't think there's any recovering that. Their production ability is kind of wild. I've heard stats where they could double their acreage of corn and soybean without cutting trees down. It's basically eliminating pasture ground. So the amount of acres that are available to them are massive.
That is interesting.
Yeah, they set production records every year, but it's not. They don't have the production ground like we do here in the United States. They've got massive amounts of acreage, but I don't think it's super fertile. And if you want to grow something on it, you have to put fertilizer down every year. So a lot of our country, we've got very fertile ground that, if the farmers needed to, they could skimp on inputs for some time just because of the types of soils that we have. And I don't think they have that luxury. So they're dependent on fertilizer.
Excellent.
Yeah, kind of the follow up on, I guess, the comment Andrew had. So in that case there, Andy, we have, U.S. soybeans and all of our production practices. And you look at what you just described in Brazil. Do countries importing soybeans take some of those practices and that kind of that background into consideration as far as how sustainable of a soy product are we purchasing?
You bet. I guess I should have sat down and counted how many different countries I've spoken to soy buyers in. It would probably be, just a wild guess, 15 to 20 different countries with, all sorts of backgrounds, whether it's, just grain traders or animal production companies that are buying for their own consumption. That's one of their main questions is how are your beans produced and is it sustainable? And that's the story that we as an American farmer can tell that a lot of other countries might not be able to speak of quite as proudly as we can. So that's always when it comes to Q&A time, some of the most asked questions we get.
Sure. As we think about how does the U.S. soy industry, or maybe even the U.S. corn industry, I know you're a corn producer as well, how do we tell that sustainability story? I know here in Nebraska, my friend who works for the soybean board has hosted some trade delegations who've gone out and visited soybean farms in Nebraska. Have you been part of any hosting of any groups here in the U.S. to show those international buyers what we're all about and how we do what we do?
No, never right here at our farm. We're kind of on the way to nowhere, so it doesn't work, super great logistically. So no, we haven't. The folks in Eastern Pennsylvania, they'll get quite a few guests. If buyers are in the country, they're coming through New York City, a lot of times. So Eastern Pennsylvania can get quite a few of those tours coming through.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's powerful as you talk about going to other countries, building relationships with the people in the industry there, and vice versa, them coming here too. Just think that just demonstrates what we probably realize every day is that we're all in the business of people and
Yeah,
relationships at
for
the end of the
sure.
day.
You
That's
know,
how, that's how agriculture
you can
works.
watch CNN or Fox News or whatever and listen to some of the trade numbers and some of the political arguments that our governments get into. But when you travel to these countries and you are, you know, very rarely would we get onto production sites, but we would have meetings and conferences in hotels around the world. And when you talk to these people, there's very little difference between us and them. At the end of the day, they've got a little different culture and eat some different foods, but they have a lot of the same aspirations and goals that we do. They want to feed their family, be able to afford to do that and go to work, etc. Go home and have whatever else going on in their life. It's very familiar to what you would see here day in and day out. So when you can put a face or a story to the folks that we're putting grain on a ship and never really seeing, it helps. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, at the end of the day, people do business with people, don't they?
That's right.
Yep, and it's another theme that always weaves through our episodes is that everything's about people and relationships.
Mm-hmm. That's why we do what we do here on Sustaining the Herd.
Absolutely.
Well, Andy, I must say this has probably been the fastest 30-40 minutes of my last week or so. This has been a blast to have this conversation with you, and I feel like we've really spanned the gamut with the things that we've talked about, and just want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to sit down and talk to Andrew and I and all of our guests, our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't say that any of it was, factual. Who knows? Hopefully nobody's fact checking any of this, but
it's all right on. And so, Brock, just so you know, I've extended the invitation to Andy to come out west and visit some feedlots and whatnot, because one part of Andy's background that we didn't get into is that he has spent time working on large Western feedlots, and we'd like to kind of get him back there and show him kind of a lot of the things that we're doing that I think he'd find pretty fascinating. You never know. Maybe someday some of those practices could show up in Indiana, Pennsylvania.
Well, maybe.
You come on out anytime, Andy. We'd be happy to host you. I will have the grill heated up and ready to throw a steak on.
Sounds good to me. I will take you up on that.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time today. And for all of our listeners, both new and our faithful followers, thank you for choosing to spend a little time with us here on Sustaining the Herd. And we look forward to being back with you again in a couple of weeks for our next episode. Until then, thanks for joining the herd today.